This is likely to be the realest review on YouTube about Rivian and Tesla. And to be honest, both Tesla and Rivian may be upset after this video and may not invite me to any events. But I had to make this video to let you guys know the brutally honest truth. I don't know if you've seen these friendly or some would say cartoonish cars on the road with big oval headlights and ruggedly good looks. This is the Rivian electric vehicle. If you don't know who I am, I'm Travis Ketchum, where I review everything Rivian, electric vehicles, and the future of transportation. As a previous Tesla owner, now actual owner of both a Rivian R1S and R1T Gen 2, I wanted to give you a review of what it's like to live with these electric vehicles through 7+ major software updates. I'm also a software CEO of a successful email marketing platform, so I evaluate software differently than what you've probably seen in other reviews. I always want to know, what can the software do today? What is the trajectory and pace of improvement? What is a realistic endpoint for the current stack? And should regular people actually put up with the current experience? And considering that electric vehicles are more software driven than ever, these are the questions that must be answered. First, let's talk about the Elon-sized elephant in the room. You see, being a Tesla owner lately has gotten, well, weird. The Tesla and Elon brands are intertwined, for better or for worse. And look, I'm not judging anyone who buys a Tesla, and I'm not judging anyone who won't buy a Tesla. This review is objectively comparing my experience with both Tesla and Rivian as individual products, and how well they work from an engineering standpoint, and how they are to actually live with day to day, so that you can make an informed decision about which might be right for you, or none at all. Whatever you decide is up to you. I just want to present to you the cold hard facts about what it's been like living with both for some time across major software revisions. Okay, with that out of the way, one of the questions you might be asking is, why Rivian? Well, we actually rented a Model 3 and took it for an over 4,000-mile road trip back in 2020. And that experience really sold my wife and I on the concept and ease of use of an electric vehicle when married with something like a supercharger network. And that process was so seamless and so easy. That was actually our first experience driving an electric vehicle. And it just really made it obvious that it had arrived. Driving an electric vehicle was easy to do even for really long road trips, which is not our normal thing to do. You couple that with the fact that I'm an Eagle Scout who loves the outdoors as much as I love software, and we went ahead and plunked down our early pre-orders back in 2021 and early 2022, long before the initial price hike that Rivian had, and so we've been holding on to these pre-orders for quite some time. We thought that Rivian had really thoughtfully rugged design, massive capability, and really brought the best of what we loved about our Jeep Grand Cherokee and married that to everything that was great about Tesla, right? Now, as we go forward, it's important for you to know that neither Rivian nor Tesla have paid for or reviewed this content before posting, so everything I tell you from here on out is just our honest experience about what it's been like, the good and the bad, about both Tesla and Rivian. So you might be wondering, how did we end up with the Tesla in the mix when we had an early pre-order for both the Rivian R1T and the R1S? Well, the reality back in 2021 is that there was really long wait times for those early Rivian pre-order holders. And you couple that with the fact that I was really worried about charging infrastructure because this was before everyone had agreed to move to NACS and before Rivian had cut a deal to get access to the supercharger network, which means I really wanted to get a max pack. I wanted the largest available battery so that I could stretch as far as possible between what I expected at the time to be few and far between charging stations without access to the supercharger network. So that ultimately means that I ended up taking delivery of a Tesla Model Y Performance in June 2022. Then, funny enough, an email came to configure my truck about 30 days after I took delivery of the Model Y. I was just like, oh, I just bought this brand new car. I can't really just turn around and sell it right away and go buy a different one. And then a few months after that, Rivian announced that they stopped production of their powered tonneau, which people are just now getting retrofits on that had broken one at delivery. And then Tesla added in the fact that they had a massive price drop of 25% plus, which really killed my equity. So the net result of all of this was it put me on the sideline longer than I anticipated. But the upside of that is it means that we got to wait as long as possible to still lock in a significant discount. And now we got our hands on both the Gen 2 R1T and the Gen 2 R1S. So we have much improved vehicles with a lot more software headroom that should, in theory, improve a lot more in the future than the Gen 1 vehicles had we taken delivery just a year or two before. So that's how we ended up with the Tesla for a little over 2 years, and then now ended up with two Rivians that are both Gen 2. Okay, so the first big comparison point that may be controversial for some of you out there is when someone's a Tesla owner who's Rivian curious, they want to know about both lane keep and adaptive cruise. The big obvious difference here is pre-mapped versus unmapped. Tesla lane centering works basically everywhere for both autopilot and full self-driving, whereas Rivian lane centering works only on pre-mapped highways, but that will change soon, and I'll touch on that more in just a moment. At delivery, Gen 2 was essentially the same as Gen 1 lane keeping assist, which hadn't really changed at all in the time of ownership for Gen 1 vehicles. So that means in a lot of ways, Rivian was kind of years behind. But since then, Gen 2 has added quite a few nice quality of life improvements that have really changed the usefulness of this feature, and I think that the rate of improvement is very likely to accelerate. So, since the beginning of Gen 2, they've now added vastly improved curve confidence and performance. So previously, if you were in a highway situation where you had the lane centering enabled and there was going to be a sharper than normal bend in the interstate, it would warn you and say, pay extra close attention because it was unconfident on its lane centering capability. That now has essentially completely disappeared, and it has such better improvement of performance. Gen 2 has also added automatic lane change on command, so when there's a clear spot in the lane next to you, you can hit the blinker and the car will execute the lane change on its own. They've also implemented automatic lane change on command where the vehicle can now accelerate to a gap. So if the left or right, wherever you're trying to go, is not immediately clear, but there's a gap slightly ahead, the car can actually accelerate a bit if there's room to fit into a gap ahead. Similarly, they've also added automatic lane change on command where the car can decelerate to a gap. So again, if there's no spot left or right, but there is slightly behind the vehicle position, the Rivian can now actually decelerate a little bit to fill a gap that makes sense to execute the lane change automatically. They've also improved vehicle cut-in performance. So if a vehicle next to you is cutting into your lane, either to fill a gap in front of you or to just temporarily be there before moving on to the next lane, the car much more gracefully handles that for dropping back and maintaining your following distance. Gen 2 has also now added hands-free driver monitoring on select divided highways, and that is a really nice experience when you're in an area where it's allowed to be enabled. After getting more hands-on time with Gen 1 as service loaner vehicles, which we'll touch more on that later, I've been able to compare both the lane keeping and adaptive cruise control of Gen 1 versus Gen 2. And after spending some time there, it's very clear that Gen 2 has notably better curve performance, it's better at keeping track of lane lines, and its radar cruise of Gen 2 is both smoother and allows for tighter following distance when compared to Gen 1. But both Gen 1 and Gen 2, all versions of Rivian, have far better adaptive cruise control in my opinion than what Tesla offers as part of their included autopilot suite with their vision-based adaptive cruise. And this is especially true when you're in stop-and-go traffic. Previously, when we had our Tesla and we were in stop-and-go traffic and we were using autopilot instead of full self-driving, it felt like the car was really just slamming on the accelerator and slamming on the brake, and it was never a comfortable experience in your proximity to other vehicles. The Rivian version is much smoother using that radar cruise. Only full self-driving or FSD appears to be smoother in my experience when you're on an AI-4 equipped vehicle running the latest version of the software. The Hardware 3 vehicle that we had that was a Tesla is not as smooth, even in FSD, as what the radar cruise is in our experience with Rivian, especially on Gen 2. Adding on top of that, Rivian's implementation of hands-on, which is a capacitive wheel, so you can simply drape your fingers over the wheel, is a much nicer experience as opposed to the torque-based sensor that Tesla tends to use on their autopilot situation, which requires you to tug on the wheel to let it know you're there or have to scroll one of the buttons. Simply resting your hands on the wheel is a much more comfortable and relaxing way to use this driver assistance systems. Both Tesla and Rivian do a good job of driver monitoring, including through sunglasses when in a situation where either system can allow you to have hands-off enabled or allowed. Tesla's big hands-off advantage, of course, comes to the fact that it's allowed essentially anywhere when you use the full self-driving software, whereas currently Rivian requires you to be in a pre-mapped highway, and even then, not everywhere that you can do hands-on is also hands-off, so it's a much more limited operating domain. However, Rivian has publicly said that unmapped road support is coming later in 2025, which I'm really looking forward to, and I think will bring a lot of Rivian owners a lot of joy. Here's a clip from Rivian Tracker with James Philbin, the VP of Autonomy at Rivian, stating exactly this and how excited he is about their unmapped road support.
I think one feedback we've heard loud and clear is that customers love HWA, but they want to use it in more places, and so that's something kind of exciting we're working on. We're calling internally Map Free that we're targeting for later this year.
So beyond just adding support for unmapped roads, which I think is going to be a huge improvement for Rivian and definitely needs to happen even be in the conversation of catching up to Tesla in this regard, has to do with actual lane positioning. On the free version of Tesla, so using autopilot, it doesn't really do lane positioning. It'll just stick with what it thinks is the middle of the lane. However, full self-driving does a really nice job of being more aware of its surroundings in terms of large vehicles if an adjacent lane is stopped or traveling at a much lower rate of speed. So what full self-driving will do in that situation is it will actually shade away from things like semi-trucks and large vehicles, which is a much more natural and comfortable way to drive. But additionally, if the lanes next to you are stopped or going incredibly slow, your vehicle will actually slow down its speed, even though it may be legally allowed to go the speed limit, because it is safer in case somebody cuts out in front of you. Both of these features are expected later in 2025 from Rivian, but they could easily slip into early 2026. And this is one of those things that I have a high degree of confidence will come to Gen 2 vehicles, but it's not something you should expect to be included the day that you buy it, and therefore has a big question mark, because you should always buy products based on what they do today, not what they might do in the future. It's also expected that this feature, just like Tesla, which keeps theirs price gated away in full self-driving, that the increased lane positioning as well as speed adapting to the lanes next to you is likely going to be part of the Rivian Autonomy Plus platform, which is definitely going to be a paid for platform, which is either going to be subscription or individual pay, but pricing has not yet been revealed. One thing that it seems that all Tesla owners can agree on is that Tesla range figures are, well, optimistic. With our Tesla, whenever we would leave a charging stop, we'd also expect to see about a 5 to 12% lower state of charge versus the navigation estimate. So we always built that into our sort of mental calculation and would charge with an additional buffer versus what was actually projected. With Rivian, they're a lot more conservative with their estimates. And this means that in practicality, you can trust them a lot more, and they tend to beat it. In basically every single case, Rivian beat its own estimate at our destination, and we would see the destination range increase slowly as we inch closer and closer along our route. So we never really leave a charging stop worried that we're going to reach the next charging location with a lower than expected state of charge. We always knew that we were going to match or exceed the range, which gives you a lot more confidence if it's your first time EV buying and is very different from the overall Tesla experience. Next, let's talk about charging time. And let me tell you, having a huge battery pack is great. In our Rivians that have the max pack batteries in them, they have about 140-ish kilowatt hours of battery capacity, whereas compared to our Model Y, which had the long range battery size in it, which is about 80-ish kilowatt hours. What's really interesting is that there was actually more estimated miles from the car computer at 80% on our Rivians than we ever saw at 100% on our Model Y. And as we said, the range accuracy is much better on the Rivians, which means this translated to a lot more range in the real world, even at 80% on the Rivian compared to 100% on the Tesla. And thanks to charging curves at each state of charge, this also means that road trip charging is actually a lot faster in our real world experience. Our Tesla required either more frequent stops due to its smaller battery, or it required going to a more full state of charge, which is you ever charge your laptop, your phone, a scooter, an e-bike, anything with a battery, you know that top 20% is so slow. So this is true in spite of the fact that Tesla is using less energy per mile versus the Rivian, since it's a smaller and lighter vehicle that's actually more aerodynamic. Rivians might not have class-leading charging or even class-leading charge curves, but they charge as fast as we reasonably needed in order to use the bathroom and grab a quick snack so that we were on the road and got to our destination at a much quicker rate. Less time charging, more time adventuring. Next, let's talk about both wipers and sensors. Even with all of Tesla's software strength, their lack of sensors ranges from annoying to legitimately unsafe. There are millions of Teslas on the road at this point with no parking sensors or front bumper cameras. Thankfully, our Model Y was in the final few months of having ultrasonic parking sensors, and every Tesla I've driven had the worst automatic windshield wiper functionality of all time. Anyone who lives in the Pacific Northwest knows exactly what I mean. Pouring down rain, they either don't run or they run too slowly. Bright sunny day, let's run the wipers at random intervals, just dragging the blade across a bone-dry windshield. No amount of cleaning seemed to help, and it's easily reproduced on every single Tesla model I've ever driven over the past few years. It all boils down to Tesla not including a cheap, dedicated rain sensor. And as nice as the latest AI4 cameras are with Tesla, the complete 360-degree view that you get in a Rivian that has 4K, HDR, and 60 frames per second cameras on the Gen 2 vehicles is simply unmatched for usefulness and clarity. Rivians also automatically bring up the 360-degree cameras when the ultrasonics see that you're close to something at low speed, like in a parking lot or near a wall. Rivian's inclusion of 5 radars, which has 4 corner radars and 1 long-range forward radar, mean that you can more confidently use adaptive cruise control in inclement weather because it's not obscured by moisture or fog the way camera-only solutions are. This is a clear win for Rivian in the Rivian versus Tesla battle. Now, let's talk about build quality. Tesla is notorious for having build quality issues. There are entire videos and websites dedicated to delivery checklists that catch and rectify issues at delivery, and our Model Y was no different. It was missing equipment, including mud flaps and rear factory PPF that was supposed to be on the car. The headliner was extremely scuffed up with dark handprints on it, which they were able to thoroughly clean, and the front dash had a clear depression right up in the front, where it was likely clipped in, and that never went away. And as much as I hate to say it, despite being a notably more premium interior and higher quality paint, Rivian's delivery build quality was actually worse on both Gen 2 vehicles that we took delivery of. Let's run through some of the hardware problems that we had at delivery with both our R1S and our R1T. Our R1S had a sagging headliner that had to be fully replaced in order to fix. The interior dash LED light strip was not operational because it had never even been plugged in at the factory. And when it did get plugged in at a later service appointment, it had some LEDs that were burned out and are still not fixed due to part shortages almost 9 months later. The R1S compact spare tire was missing in delivery. Both the R1T and R1S had poorly fitting phone charging mats with big gaps. The charging mat on the R1T didn't work at all. The truck's left gear tunnel door had a sensor fault. There was a paint chip on the hood of our R1T. The truck's alignment was off, making it pull very noticeably to the right, requiring an alignment from service, which was present at delivery. And the biggest thing of all, the truck's front suspension had a clear air leak that made the air out completely in the front tires within a few hours of being asleep, and it took 2 service appointments to finally fix. Now let's talk about handling and comfort. People love to say that Teslas drive like a sports car. Well, our Model Y rode more like a cabbage cart. The Tesla suspension was stiff, crashy, and created loud booms inside the car from the smallest imperfections in the road. While our performance trim magnified this with stiffer suspension and bigger wheels, even the Model S and Model X I've driven had many of the same undesirable attributes. Only the latest redesigned suspension for the Model 3 Highland or Model Y Juniper appear to finally fix this for Tesla with much improved comfort, handling, and cabin noise. Rivian having air suspension gives a more adjustable and capable range of handling across a wider array of use cases. The air suspension control gives you kind of 85% of 3 different vehicles in one, which Tesla really can't offer even on the Model S and X that have air suspension. Rivian offers 3 core types of drive modes: sporty and firm modes, but not quite as firm as a true sports car; comfy or luxury modes, which is not quite as well mannered as, say, a Cadillac; capable and off-road modes, which is not quite as rough and tumble as a kitted out Jeep Wrangler. And for most people, this 85% capability for all 3 types is a great one car to do everything solution for most buyers. Rivian's vertical integration gives them more control over specific situations for improved handling performance, each with their own distinct characteristics. So since we've owned the car, they've been able to tweak how it performs with speed bumps, rough pavement, low speed to make it softer, high speed to make it more firm, as well as performance and off-road modes. For Gen 2, Rivian redesigned the R1S air suspension specifically for a more comfortable ride. Both the Gen 2 R1T and R1S have smooth, quiet motors and suspension that change dynamically quite dramatically depending on if you set it to soft, moderate, or firm. The air suspension also allows the vehicle to have a kneel mode for easier entry and exit, which shorter people unanimously agree is a great feature. However, the default behavior at speed that puts the suspension ride height into auto and lowers for aerodynamic efficiency in order to milk a better EPA and real-world range has some definite drawbacks. Auto going into low creates a bouncy and very uncomfortable ride. On curvy backcountry roads or highways with big expansion joints, this sucks. The bouncy behavior in low in these settings makes both passengers and animals carsick. Turning off auto suspension at speed creates a vastly better ride quality that actually feels premium and is better than anything I've experienced in a Tesla. I really wish there was an automatic way to remember the suspension setting without forcing Rivian to change their EPA rating and simply updating the displayed range in the vehicle based on the settings you actually use and select as a driver. Next, let's talk about the interior. The inside of a Rivian is a really nice place to spend time. From cabin comfort, heated and cooled seats, and great visibility in all directions, it just feels like a premium experience, which you'd expect at this price point. Features like Connect Plus, having an in-car Wi-Fi, is something I never thought I'd use in a car, but makes it so convenient when I'm driving and need to jump on the computer for some quick work. Being able to just flip open the laptop and get right to it as if I was at home on my home Wi-Fi network is so much nicer than fiddling with hotspot settings. I also much prefer the dark headliner over the light headliners used in the Model 3 and Y when going with the Black Mountain interior. Just about every surface you look at, touch, or feel just oozes premium without being stuffy or overstated. The exterior of these vehicles creates more opportunities than we ever had with our Model Y. The R1T clearly has so many places for storage, and having even a small bed has proven extremely handy when you need to pick up mulch, wood chips, and other dirty stuff you just wouldn't want to put in your nice clean car for your garden or your house project. Additionally, the mounting points for roof racks, security cables, air compressor, and powered frunk all make for an inviting experience to add accessories and lives up to the adventure branding that Rivian likes to tout. Even small things like having a frame around the window versus frameless like every other Tesla makes this vehicle feel more rugged and ready to do whatever you ask of them. Probably my favorite exterior feature though are the super fun matrix headlights that allow you to enable your high beams more often and bracket out around the cars both in front of you and coming towards you. The headlights also give the appearance of bending around corners when you steer, which helps illuminate what's in front of you as you work your way through, say, a bendy mountain road on a nice dark night, or even around town going down a neighborhood. Bending that light where your car is going to go is really nice, and the bracketing with the matrix headlights means you fill a lot more area with a lot more light without blinding any other drivers. It's a super great feature. The size of the R1S is noticeably larger than that of the Model Y. This is both good and bad. Our family has more room than ever before, and using some of the great features like camp mode are actually feasible for someone like me who's 6'4" and can sleep in the car very comfortably. That's not something I could say of the Model Y. We actually camped in the R1S on the second night we owned it, and it was truly an awesome experience. I'm not sure I'm ever going to go back to tent camping. The added room is felt most in the second and third rows though, thanks to the boxy design versus the more curved egg shape that almost every other Tesla has. While the increased ground clearance is useful in many situations, some of our older family members or kids actually have a little bit of trouble getting in and out of the vehicle due to the increased floor height. And with the seat design, that makes the ground to seat cushion about 6 inches higher than other SUVs on the market, even when the vehicle is in kneel mode. We've never thought we'd want or need a 3-row SUV, but we already used it to bring our extended family out for a hike on the Mountain Loop Highway, and it was really great for that experience to have everyone in the same car going to the same place. As large as the R1S is versus the Model Y, the R1T is noticeably larger still. The biggest place you feel this is within parking. But the turning radius is far better than the Tesla despite its larger overall size. This is mostly due to the wheels being allowed to turn more for their off-road performance. While specific parking spots are more difficult due to vehicle length, actually getting in and out of a cul-de-sac or a parking lot or other tight parking situation a lot of times is far easier thanks to the increased turning radius. Okay, this next one is a doozy. We got to talk about the sound system. This is by far the most controversial piece of this car because nothing is more night and day different now, 6 to 8 months later, versus the day that we picked up these vehicles than the sound system. When we took delivery, the sound system was the most embarrassing and awful part of the car. I'm talking completely, inexcusably bad. It sounded so muffled and lifeless, it was as if Rivian had purchased a cheap Bluetooth speaker from Temu, wrapped it in a wet dog blanket, and stuffed it so deep into the dash they hope you forgot how much money you spent on the sound system. No, I'm not exaggerating, it was absolutely horrendous. To the point that when we were driving back from that first camping trip, a song came on that we know has a lot of low end, and it was so lifeless. My wife looked at me and laughed. It was so horrible. And she normally, while appreciates good audio, is not one to call out a product quite like that. The only reason that the premium sound system, which we paid $1,750 for as an add-on, was a D- instead of an F, is because somehow, some way, Rivian sold an even more basic audio system that was even worse. Look, I'm someone who really enjoys great audio. This is not going to be any secret to anyone who's known me for any length of time. Now, I'm not at the I have unlimited money stage to spend on speakers, but I do have the kind of enjoyment where I will spend more money than most and more effort than most in order to have a great experience. We have a truly amazing home theater setup that I've calibrated with Rock Live room calibration to get the EQ just right and make it sound amazing. And I have premium bookshelf speakers and subwoofer at my desk, invest in good headphones. I take audio seriously, but not to the insane audiophile level. I've always upgraded the audio or selected the premium option for almost every car I've ever driven because great audio while driving is so enjoyable. All this to highlight when I say the sound system experience in the Rivian R1S and R1T Gen 2 had me really regretting giving up my Tesla, which had a really quite solid sound system in it. Our R1S sound system was so bad that Rivian service even replaced the amplifier in it because the service techs also couldn't believe that it sounded that horribly. And, spoiler alert, changing the amplifier made no difference. Through countless attempts to modifying the EQ and disabling Dolby Atmos, got it to a point it was barely even good enough to turn on, let alone really enjoy. But here's where the magic of a completely software-driven car like Tesla or Rivian can really shine. Through subsequent updates, the audio system made a huge lurch forward. First, there were several updates to get rid of that muddy sound, and it worked almost too well because suddenly the sound became too heavy or bright. Then they found a way to balance the harshness on the high end, and it really was quite pleasing, but it was missing the low end. Next, they vastly improved the sound differences between Dolby Atmos and non-Atmos tracks. And then lastly, in the big upgrade that we had most recently, There's low end. The system suddenly has low end like it should have since day one. It is truly astounding that what started as probably the worst sounding audio system in any car I've ever owned has gone from a charitable D minus to a solid B plus, and it's really quite enjoyable now. If someone is picking up a new Rivian today with a premium sound system, I think they're actually mostly going to enjoy and be quite happy with what comes out of the box. Flat EQ, no fuss, no muss, just turn it on and enjoy the music. It's really quite stark from where it was just 6 or 8 months ago. I still think that Dolby Atmos makes the audio sound a lot worse in the car and not to my taste. So if you disable spatial audio, turn off the fade mixing, and lightly tune the EQ just a few clicks to your liking, you'll have a really solid sound system. In case you're wondering what settings I use in my vehicle, here's a photo for reference if you feel like trying it out for yourself and tweaking to your own personal taste. But please note, since they've made such big updates over time, it is likely that they've probably made more updates to the sound system in the future, and I always recommend going back to a flat EQ, listening to it for several drives, and then nudging it to your taste. I think this area alone is one of the most surprising turnarounds of any product I've ever purchased. And while some physical limitations, such as the fact that their so-called subwoofer, being a 6x9 speaker, are going to be impossible to overcome, the work they've done here to improve is nothing short of incredible. Next, let's talk about tech and software problems. Tesla is really a software-first company, and their relentless iteration on things like mobile app and in-car software controls are industry-leading for a reason. Rivian ships updates approximately every 4 weeks, and we've experienced approximately 7 major updates to our vehicles and a few smaller updates to our mobile apps. However, one big change in Gen 2 is the completely redesigned ECUs, which are the little computers around the car that handle various car functions. If sometimes living in the Tesla ecosystem felt a bit like beta software, then Rivian has more like alpha software. If you're in the software world at all, you know that both alpha and beta software versions come with bugs and issues that need to be worked out. There are several examples of software gremlins that have reared their head in our 6 months of ownership, and these Gen 2 vehicles ranging from annoying and anxiety producing to downright awful. Let me preface by saying, as a software CEO of over a decade, I have more than the average level of understanding for bugs and issues, and also what they mean for the cost of being at the cutting edge of technology in general. The issue is that sometimes these bugs are majorly annoying or disruptive in your day-to-day use. These bugs were sometimes related to the infotainment input lag, phone as a key being unresponsive, phone as a key being overly responsive, which means it was unlocking and relocking at inappropriate times, speaker channels that would just stop working until you do an infotainment reset, seat position not moving for the approaching driver/key that it should have, music services disconnecting, and then you have more problematic ones such as the Halloween mode basically breaking supercharger operation for one of our cars, more on that later, the car refusing to even re-add driver keys at all, which would mean no proximity lock or unlock, no remote cabin conditioning, no in-app control over locks, frunk, or other access, and no remote security camera access. Thankfully, the vast majority of these bugs and issues that have cropped up over the past few months have been bundled into each major update every 4 weeks, so that Rivian's team seems to be really addressing them one by one and trying to knock out as many known bugs as possible each and every update. But it's still hard to shake the feeling that the customer is being asked to tolerate what is sometimes really disruptive software issues for weeks or months until they're finally ultimately resolved. By contrast, while our Tesla had a few software issues that would require a car restart, they were far less frequent and they were far less disruptive when they did happen to our day-to-day operation compared to what we experienced with the Rivian. Now let's talk about the service situation. Since Rivian has done such a commendable job rectifying all the other negatives that I've listed so far that we've experienced in our first 6 to 8 months of ownership, that really only leaves one big thing left to address: service. The current state of Rivian service would by far and away be the #1 reason to not buy a Rivian right now. I want to be 100% clear. When service has been involved, they've done a great job at making the problems actually get fixed and haven't given us a hard time when we've flagged issues for resolution. The core service problem that Rivian has right now is twofold. One, cars are being delivered day one to customers with too many defects that should be reasonably caught somewhere earlier in the production or delivery pipeline. The cost for Rivian to fix these items post-delivery has to not only be astronomical through loaner cars, logistics, customer communication, etc., but it's wildly inefficient for everyone's time and causes stress on the customer experience that simply doesn't need to exist. Two, when issues are identified, it can be literal months before any service appointments are available depending on your area. While a direct-to-consumer model is great in so many ways, such as no haggling, no second sticker, no sweaty finance rooms or warranty shakedown room, It also means that the burden of support times land squarely on Rivian. With our Tesla, there are not only far more service locations in more convenient spots around our home, but wait times were drastically lower, and more times than not seemed able to be resolved through a mobile service appointment. Waiting months in any service situation is hard, but these kind of lead times for things that should have been corrected on delivery day one are even harder to swallow. To really summarize here, the Rivian service staff have been great to work with, and ultimately they have resolved all but one issue, which is held back due to parts availability. But this is a big but. If Rivian wants to succeed when the higher volume R2 and R3 variants start hitting the road, they need to drastically increase both delivery QA and their available service footprint, because normal customers at normal price points and normal adopters are not going to tolerate things the way that they stand today. Next, let's talk about charging, a key component to EV ownership. I mentioned earlier about our 3-year pre-order experience, which had us worried about the ability to find reliable chargers that were in the CCS world instead of in the Tesla world. This means that we pre-ordered before the industry finally agreed that NACS was the unified port of the future, and before Rivian made a deal for widespread, although not quite 100% supercharger access. In general, charging has been just as practically convenient as it was with our Tesla, now that most of the superchargers that you truly need can work with your Rivian using an adapter. We only had one instance with the R1S where it was seemingly bugged out from the Halloween mode update and gave us grief during one attempted supercharging session. All charging attempts since then have been completely uneventful, but it's still worth mentioning that we did have that one bad experience. Thankfully, a different CCS charging station was right next door to the superchargers, and we were able to get it to work since it was just tap to pay and didn't need as much vehicle communication as seemingly the supercharger solution did. The only other major downside to charging with a Rivian versus Tesla comes down to the cost of charging. Without paying Tesla's subscription, Rivian rates are higher per kilowatt hour than it is if you have a Tesla on the Tesla network. Rivian's recent price hike for Rivian Adventure Network means that even their network, which is first party to Rivian vehicles, is even higher priced than the non-member price you get from a supercharger, which really makes them unattractive to charge at unless they're in a unique location that enables some kind of adventure that's hard to get to. A less important but still noteworthy fact about charging versus Tesla is that not every single V3 or V4 charging station is open to Rivian, and none of the V2 or urban chargers will work with your Rivian. Destination chargers at places like hotels should work just fine though. Now that we've spent at least 6 months each with both the Gen2 R1S and the R1T, what do we think? I think it's been a worthwhile experience, and there's been so much utility in what EVs in this form factor have to offer that we've been able to do things we just couldn't have done in our previous Tesla. Like car camping because I'm tall, driving over rocky and rough terrain because of the clearance, carrying dirty stuff in the bed because it has one, things like that. Spending the time we have with the cars has been a really important piece of knowing what it's like to actually live with the car for real versus a short-term press loaner. There are things that you just experience through software and experience that take time to really soak in. I can't think of a single vehicle that has the breadth of capability that Rivian currently offers, and the way they've been able to, sometimes dramatically, improve aspects of the car has really been impressive. The sound system specifically sits at the top of that example list. So what does all this mean for the future of Rivian? Like all technology, it should continue to refine and improve. A Rivian in 2026 is going to be notably better than a Rivian in 2025, which was a lot better than 2024, etc. If they can carry this through line to their R2 and other products in the future successfully, it's easy to see how they could have plenty of demand for a product that's actually fun to drive and own. However, the number one concern I have for them is their service availability and QA. Both of these things must have a material level of improvement before they are truly ready to scale. Thankfully, with their Volkswagen joint venture and other opportunities on the table, their odds of survival as a company have gone up dramatically just in the last 6 to 12 months. All I know is that despite all the headaches we had in our early ownership experience, now that our cars are mostly as they were intended to be originally, I can't help but smile every single time I get the chance to drive and go on another adventure. I hope you enjoyed this brutally honest 6-month review of our Gen2 R1S and Gen2 R1T as compared to our Tesla Model Y experience. Should you consider buying or leasing a Rivian, don't forget you can use my referral link below for hundreds of dollars in credit towards Rivian Gear Shop so that you're ready to go for your next EV adventure. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button below and subscribe if you want to learn more about Rivians and EVs. I so appreciate you taking the time to watch. Let me know down in the comments, would you consider Rivian? Are you waiting for the R2? Are you sticking with your Tesla? Sound off below. And until next time, take care.